Hey guys, tonight we're diving into why Roman beds were infested. Forget everything Hollywood told you. This is the real story, and trust me, you probably wouldn't last a day. So before you get too comfortable, hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep dive and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a snack, and let's jump in. You lie back on your Roman bed and immediately regret it. The mattress beneath you squishes. Not like modern foam, but like something organic, something slightly damp. It smells like old goat, dusty wool, and stale vinegar. You don't want to move because every shift makes it worse. The surface scratches, the scent thickens, and then it twitches. At first you think it's in your head, but then it happens again. A tiny pinch right on your thigh, another one lower down. Something's biting you. Multiple somethings. This isn't sleep. This is a live-action infestation. Welcome to the Roman bedroom. Roman beds weren't made for comfort. They were wooden frames with ropes, or leather strips stretched across like a cheap hammock. On top of that went a homemade mattress, usually a sack stuffed with straw, wool clumps, maybe some goat hair. If you were rich, maybe feathers. But no matter what was inside, one thing was certain. Bugs loved it. Bed bugs, lice, fleas, mites, the whole horror show. These weren't unexpected guests. They were part of the experience. You didn't get rid of them. You just accepted them. The Romans didn't have pesticides or vacuum cleaners. They had superstition, hope, and occasionally herbs. And when things got really bad, you didn't wash the mattress. You dragged it into the sunlight and beat it senseless with a stick. If bugs came crawling out, you stomped them. That was the closest thing to a deep clean. If you were poor, you didn't even get a mattress. Maybe a pile of straw, maybe a blanket, or just the floor. No pillow, no sheets, no sympathy. If you were sick, things got worse. Roman hospitals reused beds without disinfecting them. One person would die in the straw, and the next would be tucked in a few hours later. You'd lie in a puddle of someone else's fever sweat and hope the gods were feeling generous. Even the wealthier households didn't escape the crawl. Their beds looked better, nicer frames, dyed sheets, but they still used the same stuffing, just with more perfume. Gold-trimmed sheets didn't scare off parasites. They just smelled slightly better while you were scratching. The bedding absorbed everything. Sweat, oil, skin, wine, herbs, illness. Over time, it flattened out into something more like a rug than a mattress. You didn't toss it. You kept adding layers, one filthy sheet over another like a mouldy lasagna. You try to sleep. The mattress creaks. The bugs bite. Someone coughs in the next room and your straw pillow exhales a faint scent of wet sheep. You turn onto your side, something crunches. This is Roman bedtime, not a retreat, a battleground. You make peace with the bugs, kind of. You scratch, you shift, you try not to think about what's touching your ankle. The mattress creaks. The air is heavy with old sweat and animal hair, and somewhere in the room, something shuffles. You're too tired to care. You close your eyes, you almost drift off, and then you feel it. A sudden warmth at your back, something breathing, something heavy. It nestles close, almost lovingly, and lets out a sigh. It's not romantic, it's not comforting, it's your cousin, or your brother, or a neighbour passing through who needed a place to crash. Because in ancient Rome, you didn't sleep alone. Not unless you were fabulously rich, and even then, privacy was optional. Beds weren't sacred spaces. They were shared resources. Place to rest, scratch, fart and sweat in the company of others. Roman homes were tight. Even the well-off lived with extended family under one roof. Multi-generational households were normal. So were visitors. So were slaves. And everyone had to sleep somewhere. So they squeezed in. Head to toe. Side by side. Piled in like laundry in a broken hamper. There were no my side or your side arguments. The only boundary was how much elbow room you could claim before someone muttered a curse in Latin and shoved you. In poorer homes, the bed was often just a shared pile of straw in the corner of a smoky one-room house, a plank of wood if you were lucky, dirt floor if you weren't. People curled up like puppies, fighting for warmth. Children slept between parents, cousins by the fire, uncles snoring into doorways. In wealthier homes, things looked nicer but felt just as crowded. Bedrooms might be separate, but beds were still shared. A Roman nobleman might lie beside his wife with a servant dozing at the foot of the bed, ready to fetch wine or fan flies away. Guests might be placed in the same bed if space was tight. Hospitality meant sharing your infestation. And then there were the slaves. They weren't always given their own bedding. Many slept on mats, or on the floor, or, if their master was particularly self-indulgent, at the foot of the master's bed like a dog, ready to be summoned in the middle of the night for wine, food, or worse. Some were required to sleep nearby at all times, their bodies considered as functional as furniture. It wasn't unusual to be woken in the middle of the night by a command. Not for the bathroom, Romans didn't have those in their bedrooms, but for something like adjusting a blanket or finding a misplaced sandal. If you were lucky, you got to sleep again. If not, you were up until dawn, holding a torch while your master scratched bug bites and composed a letter. Now, let's bring in the animals. Romans loved their pets. Dogs were popular, both little lapdogs and larger protective breeds. They kept vermin away and warmed your feet. Cats too were respected, especially in the East. They hunted mice, purred into your chest and shed everywhere. Ferrets made appearances too. Chickens might wander inside during the night, pecking at crumbs and leaving unpleasant surprises near your pillow. And if you lived in the countryside, or just weren't rich enough to own a proper barn, you might find yourself sharing space with something a little more rustic. Goats, pigs, maybe even a donkey. Animals weren't always kept outdoors. Thieves roamed the night. Predators too. So livestock came inside. They curled up in corners, wandered near the hearth, slept next to children, and sometimes, when the floor was too crowded or cold, they climbed onto the bedding. Not because they were invited, but because no one could stop them. You'd turn over and find a goat staring back at you, chewing your blanket with casual menace, its hooves thudding against the wooden floor, its body heat mixing with the dozen others in the room. If it was a particularly restless animal, it might get up in the middle of the night and relieve itself near the fire. That was normal. No one screamed. They just tossed a rag over it and went back to sleep. You didn't complain. Complaining didn't clean the floor. It didn't get you another bed. It just made you look weak. The nighttime soundtrack was a symphony of snoring, scratching, chewing, the occasional fart, someone muttering in their sleep, and the high-pitched squeak of lice dancing in your pillow, and you lay there, breathing it all in, the mingling of human sweat, animal musk, fermented wine breath, herbal oils, burnt olive smoke, and faint urine. A cocktail of domestic Roman life, a scent that clung to your tunic, hair, and lungs long after you'd woken. The idea of personal space didn't exist. You were part of a communal stew. You didn't sleep to relax. You slept to survive, to store up just enough strength to make it through another day of work, worship, and scratching. And every morning you woke up with a few more bites and a few less illusions. The sun rises over the tiled rooftops of Rome. Light leaks through a crooked shutter and lands directly on your face. You open your eyes to a sore back, a dry throat, and the distinct sensation that something spent the night nibbling your calf. You stretch. The bed groans. The straw shifts. Something tiny scurries toward the seams and vanishes. It's cleaning day. Now don't get excited. This isn't spa day. There are no fluffy towels, no mint-scented detergent, no sterilized linens wafting from the dryer. Cleaning a Roman bed is more ritual than remedy. You don't aim for clean. You aim for slightly less cursed. Step 1. Remove the mattress, if you even have one. Most Romans don't own multiple sets. There's no closet full of extras. What you've got is a single overworked sack of fabric stuffed with straw, wool, feathers, or whatever happened to be lying around when it was first made, probably years ago. Step 2. Beat it. No joke. You drag the mattress out into the courtyard or street, lean it against a post or wall and start swinging. A stick, a paddle, a flat piece of wood, whatever's on hand. The idea is to scare out the bugs, dust and layered regrets. With each thwack, a little cloud puffs into the air, pollen, hair, straw dust, maybe a half-smashed flea. The richer you are, the bigger your mattress, and the harder it is to clean. The poor, their mattresses are smaller but no less revolting. Step 3. Herbs, wormwood, rosemary, bay leaves, maybe some crushed lavender if you're feeling decadent. You don't clean the mattress, you mask the stench. Stuffing in herbs is like putting perfume on a rotting fish. It doesn't fix it, but it lets you fall asleep without crying. Step 4. The sheets, if you have them. Most people don't. A proper set of linen sheets is expensive, time-consuming to make, and even harder to maintain. If you're middle class or lower, you reuse your bedding until the fibres beg for release. Now here comes the worst part. Washing the linens involves urine. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Roman fullers, the laundry workers of the day, use vats of human urine to clean fabric. Urine is full of ammonia. Ammonia breaks down stains, so workers collect it from jars placed on public corners. Passers-by relieve themselves. The fullers gather it up, dump it into massive tubs and soak the cloth. Then they stomp on it. Barefoot, rhythmic, like a foul-smelling dance floor of decay. You rinse the linens in water after the urine bath. But this is ancient Rome. Rinse might mean dunking it in the same river where someone just emptied their chamber pot. There's no such thing as fresh scent, just less awful. The sun is your only real ally. If the weather is good, you lay the sheets out to dry on rocks or rooftops. If not, you hang them indoors, hoping the smoke from the hearth doesn't just bake in more funk. Meanwhile, the mattress sits outside trying to absorb sunshine like a sad loaf of bread. It won't be any cleaner, just drier. The bugs will return the second it's inside, you know this. But you pretend otherwise. If the mattress is too far gone, you might restuff it. Remove the old filling. Burn it if you're smart. Find new straw. Beg for feathers. Pray for wool. Restuff the sack and stitch it closed. But most people don't do this. Too expensive. Too time-consuming. So they keep sleeping on the old stuffing until it flattens out into a crusty mat of human history. Pillows. Same deal. Straw. Wool. Stuffed and forgotten. No pillowcases. No covers. If it starts to smell like the back end of a donkey, you flip it over and pretend that solves the problem. Even in rich households, the cleaning process is mostly aesthetic. Servants do the beating. Slaves handle the washing. Maybe you light some incense. Maybe you rub oil into the wood of the bed frame. Maybe you close your eyes and imagine you're somewhere else. The truth is, whether you're poor or patrician, you're still sleeping on a sack of infestation. The difference is that the rich have curtains, and perfume, and someone else to do the stomping. But under all of it, beneath the herbs, the gold accents, the decorative carvings, you still have the same straw, the same bugs, the same damp weight of nightly sweat. It just smells slightly fancier. When the bed is dragged back inside, fluffed with a few herbs and arranged with whatever sheets survived the soak, it's declared clean. A triumph of labour over inevitability. You lay down that night, freshly bathed in olive oil, hair combed, incense burning faintly in the corner. And just before your eyes close, you feel it again. That twitch, the bite, the slow, creeping certainty that nothing you did today truly changed anything. You'd think wealth would protect you, that a little money might buy you peace, comfort, clean sheets, a bed that doesn't hiss when you press your weight into it. You'd be wrong. Because even the Roman elite, the senators, merchants, generals, poets, still went to sleep with fleas. They just did it on nicer linens. In the villas of the upper class, bedrooms were decorated with frescoes, columns, and imported marble. The bed frames were carved from fine wood, inlaid with ivory or bronze. There were silks from the East, dyed fabrics in deep purples and reds, rare perfumes, incense burners, and servants to draw the curtains. But beneath all of that, the same mattress, a slightly puffier, more perfumed version of the same overstuffed sack of straw, wool, and parasites. The difference was only skin deep. Rich Romans didn't clean their own beds. That was the job of slaves. Young girls and boys, often barefoot and half-starved, dragging massive heavy bedding out into the courtyard. They beat the mattresses, they added herbs, they soaked the sheets, if they were lucky, in water laced with imported oils. If not, they still used the same urine vats, the same foot-stomping dance, the same drying racks under the same sun. Sometimes the fabrics were dyed so richly they masked stains. Sometimes the perfumes were strong enough to blur the stink, but none of it got rid of the bugs. The fleas didn't care about your silk. Mites weren't intimidated by carved oak bedposts. You could be a Roman aristocrat reclining on a cushioned couch surrounded by mosaics, and still wake up scratching your ankle until it bled. And let's not forget, many wealthy Romans hosted guests. Constantly. Households weren't private sanctuaries. They were buzzing centres of politics and gossip. Important people came to visit, stayed for days, ate your food, slept in your spare bed. They brought their own bugs, and left some behind. Beds weren't changed between guests. You might throw on a fresh sheet if one was available, but the mattress, the pillows, the underlying structure of infestation, that stayed, like an inheritance. For noble women, it was worse in some ways. Their beds were expected to be pristine, fragrant, inviting, a display of status. But underneath the rose petals and hand-woven throws, they endured the same bites, the same filth, the same slow rot of old fabric and older expectations. Some women burned incense constantly, not for worship but for masking the reek. They crushed dried flowers and herbs into their bedding. They rubbed scented oil on their temples before lying down, not to sleep better, just to breathe better. Even in the palaces, the mattresses were rarely changed. Restuffed occasionally, yes, but over time, everything grew heavier, denser. Each bed absorbed the weight of those who'd slept in it, physically and spiritually. Layers of body oil, dried wine, dust from far-off lands, sometimes blood, sometimes worse. And the beds were shared still. A senator might sleep beside his wife, with a servant lying just out of sight waiting for a midnight request. A visiting official might be placed in a guest bed that hadn't been properly beaten in months. You never really knew whose skin had touched the sheets before yours, or what they'd left behind. The rich weren't spared from the noise either. Big homes echoed, marble amplified sound. At night the walls whispered, servants shifting, animals padding across the floor, someone groaning in the next room. And always, always, the faint scratching of something small moving inside the mattress. Luxury dulled the discomfort, but it didn't erase it. You could sleep under dyed silk with bronze lamps casting golden light across your walls, and still wake up with a welt the size of a coin behind your ear. At least the poor didn't pretend. They knew their beds were filthy. They expected to suffer. But the wealthy, they wrapped their filth in gold and insisted it smelled like jasmine. And yet, night after night, they lay down just like everyone else, on the same creaking frame, into the same mattress, beneath the same veil of illusion, skin pressed to straw, back aching, eyes heavy, itching. Somewhere in the shadows a servant shifts on their mat. A dog sighs and curls up near the door. The oil lamp flickers. Dust floats in the air. And in that thick, quiet moment, neither rich nor poor is safe from what lives in the seams. Eventually the night came, whether you were ready for it or not. Whether you lived in a cramped insula above a smoky bakery or a countryside villa surrounded by statues and silence, the day always ended in the same way, with the reluctant ritual of sleep. And no matter your status, slave, merchant, noble, emperor, the experience wasn't so different. Everyone had to lie down, everyone had to close their eyes, and everyone had to face the living, breathing discomfort of Roman bedding. The sun dipped below the roof lines, the wind pushed through crooked wooden shutters, the streets below still hummed with tavern voices, footsteps, mule carts creaking across stone, and the distant bark of dogs. But inside, things were quieter. Just you, your bed, and whatever still crawled beneath the covers. The mattress, if you had one, was no longer even pretending to help. It had collapsed into a lumpy, sweat-darkened shape, pressed flat by years of shifting bodies. The stuffing had long since settled into uneven terrain, one corner high and scratchy, another sagging into a soft pit of damp wool and flattened straw. You'd rotated it, you'd flipped it. None of it worked. It was tired. So were you. The itch had returned just as it always did. No matter how thoroughly the mattress had been beaten earlier that day, no matter how many bay leaves were shoved into the seams, the bugs always found their way back. You could feel them moving. Tiny, hungry, methodical. You scratched reflexively. You turned onto your side. You groaned. The bed groaned back. If you shared the space with family or strangers, your sleep came with added chaos. Elbows in your back, breath in your face, the accidental thud of a leg kicking your shin, the muttered words of someone dreaming about fish, the rhythmic nasal trumpet of someone too tired to even roll over, and of course, the goat, or the chicken, or the dog snoring from under the frame. Blankets were scarce and thin. The poor made do with cloaks or layers of worn clothing. The wealthy had woolen throws or imported fabrics. But even those, frayed and faded, couldn't stop the cold that crept in during the early morning hours. There was no central heating, no insulation, just you, trying to curl tighter into yourself, preserving body heat and pretending your foot wasn't poking into something damp. The pillow was no help either. A rough sack of stuffing, flattened and stiff. It smelled faintly of smoke, oil, and the ghost of last month's fever. You flipped it, knowing full well the other side was no better. You gave it a shake, as if that might undo time. It thudded lifelessly. A gesture more ritual than relief. The sounds of the night pressed against your skull. Wood creaking, distant coughing. The snort of a mule. The soft thud of someone tripping over a chamber pot. Somewhere in the house, a child whimpered. Someone muttered an apology. Someone else farted. And above it all, just under the surface, the sound of something scratching. This was not rest. It was containment. Even for the rich, the bed was not a sanctuary. It was just better decorated suffering. The mattress might be filled with goose feathers. The sheets might be dyed in imperial purple. The furniture might be carved from imported cedar. But underneath it all, inside the seams and corners, there were still bugs, still dust, still the slow, sour weight of countless nights exactly like this one. Sleep was something the body demanded, not something it enjoyed. You closed your eyes not to dream but to cope. You endured the pressure in your joints, the tension in your spine, the dull ache in your temples. You chased unconsciousness like it was a favour, a trick, a stolen breath before the next day dragged you back into motion. Dreams, if they came, were brief and vague. Shapes, sensations, faces you half recognised. A donkey standing in your kitchen. A neighbour turning into a jar of olive oil. Then you jolt awake with a start, heart racing, blanket tangled around your legs, and the unmistakable feeling that something just bit your shoulder. There was no checking the time, no light beside the bed. You lay there, eyes open in the dark, waiting for your body to forget it was uncomfortable enough to try again. This was Rome's hidden rhythm, the unglamorous undercurrent of empire. Every soldier, every poet, every baker, every politician, every mother, every thief, all bound by the same nightly war, against heat, cold, noise, stink, skin, and still they slept. They had to, because in the morning there would be no rest, only labour, only expectation, only the onward crawl of a civilization that had no patience for sleep-deprived excuses. The Empire didn't care that your pillow was wet. It didn't pause because your mattress smelled like feet and pine oil. It marched forward, stone by stone, decree by decree, while its people scratched their ankles and tried not to scream. You didn't sleep to dream. You slept to survive. The Roman Empire was vast, grand, ruthless. It stretched across continents, bent languages into Latin, paved roads that still defy erosion, carved law into stone, and wrote poetry into permanence. It conquered lands, engineered cities, and burned its enemies into silence. Its triumphs were sung in amphitheatres, its failures buried in ash. But behind every statue, beneath every decree, underneath every god's gaze, there was a bed. Not a metaphor, a real one, rough, stained, infested, sagging beneath the weight of emperors and slaves alike. Because the empire wasn't just made of soldiers and senators, it was made of sleepers, millions of them. Every night closing their eyes in rooms that stank of goat and mould, laying their bones down on sacks of straw, pressing their skin into ancient discomfort and waiting for unconsciousness. It didn't matter how powerful you were, or how eloquent your last speech had been in the Senate, or how many coins you owned. When night fell, you still had to return to your corner of the world, your mat, your mattress, your lumpy, creaky, scratch-ridden place in the dark, just like everyone else. The architecture of Rome was public, bold, glorious. But its architecture of sleep, that was hidden, shameful. You won't find it celebrated in marble reliefs or praised in heroic verse. No poet wrote an ode to the lice in Lucius's pillow. No historian recorded how many bedbugs bit Julius Caesar the night before he crossed the Rubicon. The bed was always just off stage, and yet it was there, always there. The forgotten frame beneath the empire's spine, a place where ambition collapsed, where generals snored, where slaves curled in silence, where lovers whispered beneath threadbare linen, and where bodies slowly, painfully gave themselves over to sleep. When you look at Rome now, when you tour the ruins, walk the baths, admire the mosaics, you're seeing only half the story. You're seeing what was meant to last, what was meant to be remembered. The stone, the spectacle, the myth. You're not seeing the bedrooms. You're not seeing the stiff mattresses soaked with oil and sweat, or the mouldy pillows flipped for the 100th time, or the little shudders of a man too proud to admit he's terrified of what just crawled across his leg. You're not hearing the scratching, the coughing, the shifting weight of 4 bodies trying to share one sheet. You're not feeling the stale breath of someone sleeping inches from your face. You're not smelling the old wool, the herbal oil, the faint ammonia of something that passed for clean. But it was there. Every night the empire turned in its bed. It scratched, it sighed, it flinched at the shadows, it shifted in its sleep, and sometimes it dreamed. Even its greatness, Rome's unmatched scale and influence, couldn't scrub away the nightly ritual of laying down in the dark and making do, of sharing warmth, of tolerating the bite, of pressing through the discomfort because morning was always coming, whether you were rested or not. In this, the Romans were no different than we are. They weren't marble gods or golden silhouettes. They were itchy, sleep-deprived human beings who tried to wrap themselves in borrowed warmth and convince their bodies to rest in less than ideal conditions. They woke up groggy. They shuffled through the day. They made empires in between naps they never quite recovered from. There is something strangely intimate about that. Something grounding. You may not know what it felt like to march with a legion, or to orate in the forum, or to pour wine for a patrician feast. But you know what it means to lie awake, to shift and scratch and sigh and ache, to want sleep but not quite find it. That's the part of Rome no one talks about, not because it's unimportant, but because it's too human. And yet, it's there, between the columns, beneath the frescoes, hiding in the seams of history. The quiet truth that even the mighty, especially the mighty, must lie down eventually. And when they do, they face the same humbling discomfort as everyone else. In the end, Rome slept badly, just like the rest of us.